Hey everybody, this is Josh Ronquist here, and I am back for the year that I was in kindergarten, the year of 1994. So let's just get right into it. The top 10 albums of 1994. Coming in at number 10, I have Widowmaker with Stand By the Pain, the sophomore and final album from this ill-fated 90s band fronted by Dee Snider, but also featuring the magnificent guitar playing of Al Pitrelli. Yes, this is a band that took what worked so well about 80s metal, making it catchy, but also adding a bit of 90s influence as well too. Like, it's almost thrash. If it was a little bit heavier, it could almost be death metal, but it is so layered with that 80s sound, but updated for a 90s audience. And it's a real shame that this didn't work out the way that they wanted to, because there was a lot of potential in this band. They could have kept getting heavier just like Skid Row did with both albums. I mean, this is probably the heavier of the two albums. I would say that the debut album is probably more of my favorite album, but both of these albums are absolutely solid. And if you want that good range of like just a little bit heavier than your normal heavy metal band at the time, talking pure heavy metal, not death metal or anything like that, just a little bit heavier than the 80s heavy metal, this is a band and an album you definitely need to check out. And at number 9, I of course have Machine Head with Burn My Eyes. I have a lot of great feelings and admirations towards this album. One huge part of it is I used to cover the song Death Church in an old cover band I used to be in, and I really miss playing that. I love the fact that the song just consistently just gets faster and faster and faster until the very end, and the double kicks just kick in, and it's just awesome to hear. But there's so many great songs on here. I mean, one of the greatest 90s metal anthems is hearing Rob Flynn scream, "Let Freedom Ring" with a shotgun blast. Maybe it doesn't necessarily hold up in 2023, but it definitely worked in 94. But in all seriousness, just like, this is a great heavy metal album. There's a lot of groove metal influence. You can see that by this time, like a lot of bands weren't doing the thrash metal thing at this point. They were trying to focus on something a little more catchier to the people at the time, so it was a little more alternative, and then some bands went more nu metal, like Machine Head. But this is one of those last bastion albums where it was just like, it was almost thrash, it was almost death, it was almost groove, but overall, it still may be. Although, The Blackening and Through the Ashes of Empires are my two other favorite Machine Head albums, which, hey, maybe I should do a backwards marathon on. Burn My Eyes is one of the most seminal debut albums in all of 90s metal, and you just can't deny that. Coming in at number 8, I have Amorphous with Tales from the Thousand Lakes, and I was very fortunate enough back in 2015, which, now that I think about it, it'll be coming up on 8 years ago that I saw this during Memorial Day weekend, and wow. First of all, I loved seeing this album from start to finish in a live setting. It was incredible. But also, second, time really does seem to fly by. This is really where Amorphous started, and I really love their take on the death metal sound. I love the fact that there's a little progressive elements that happen throughout here, the tad bits of folk metal that does happen, but most importantly, like I mentioned, finish death metal. And especially for that 90s sound, Amorphous was one of the bands doing it the best, right along there with Sentenced, which I will cover in other aspects at other points, which I already have. But also, Amorphous is just one of those great bands that really started off in one way, like being like mostly a pure death metal band, and grew to be something more grand. And I really love the current sound that they have right now, but they're always evolving, and I love that in a band. So even with the evolution, I love going backwards, and I love seeing where it all came from. And there's no better starting point for Amorphous than with Tales from the Thousand Lakes. Coming in at number 7, we got Bolt Thrower, Bolt Thrower, Bolt Thrower, Bolt Thrower. If you know where that's from, you're a friend of mine. But yes, Bolt Thrower with For Victory. The maybe most perfect Bolt Thrower album. Like, I feel like this is definitive bolt thrower here. Just, they found that perfect sound on this album. Like, they didn't need to have the blast beats anymore. They didn't need to go above a certain tempo anymore. They were able to be slower to mid-paced death metal, which is one of my favorite aspects of death metal, when you're able to just hit that fine line of not too fast, not too slow, just right in the middle. It just sounds so good. And both were pretty much continued this on throughout the rest of their career. And For Victory is just a perfect example of that, and so many bands have taken that approach ever since Bolt Thrower perfected it here in '94. Is it my favorite Bolt Thrower album? There is an argument for that, and I should probably do a backwards marathon to figure out what really is my favorite Bolt Thrower album. But this is where I feel like they hit the mountaintop, and they were able to just continue being who they want to be from there on out. So yes, check out Bolt Throwers For Victory. Coming in at number 6 is one of my favorite singers, and one that I don't talk about enough, but if you look back far enough on this YouTube page, you'll see that I even did a bootleg live recording with permission of Dax Riggs of Acid Bath. Of course, that was for his solo material, but I love where he started from with Acid Bath, and the debut album, When the Kite String Pops, is much like Widowmaker, one of 2 studio albums the band was able to make, but it's probably my favorite of the 2. The band is very hard to describe. I mean, they can have some sludgy sounds, they can have some southern metal sounds, they get alternative and experimental at times. They never hit that death metal or black metal or grindcore area that you would think a band like Acid Bath would hit. Especially if you've never heard this name before, you would expect them to be more very extreme in their sound, and they're not. And shame on you for judging because of a band's name. But Dax Riggs has one of the most soothing sounds in all of rock and metal. His voice just hits in all of the right spots. And whether he gets a little heavier, whether he gets a little more bluesy, whatever the case is, he's able to hit those vocal arrangements so well. And if it wasn't for Acid Bath, you wouldn't have bands like Soylent Green and Goat Whore. So why don't you check out where some of those members came from? Of course, there was other members as well. Whether you enjoy Soylent Green, whether you enjoy Goat Whore, or maybe you enjoy Dax Riggs' solo material and you never actually checked out Acid Bath before because the name scared you off. Give it a shot. You might be pleasantly surprised. Coming in at number 5 is my favorite punk band of all time, Bad Religion, with Stranger Than Fiction. 90s Bad Religion is my favorite Bad Religion, with one major exception which I guarantee will show up later when that time comes. But 90s Bad Religion covers all the ground that I love. When they get mid-tempo to slow, it hits hard. When they do that mid-tempo and almost too fast of punk, that's my favorite style. And no one does that better than Bad Religion. And Stranger in Fiction is a prime example of all of that. And of course, what I do love about Bad Religion so much is they are a punk band that knows how to harmonize. Yes, the backing vocals in Bad Religion almost shine over the lead vocals. Almost. But they work together in perfect symphonics. And it's just great to see that the harmony of their vocals just blends together so very well. And when those hits, even if it's just the oohs and ahs, it makes me go ooh and ah, yeah. Stranger Than Fiction is just one of those albums that just hits it so perfectly. And other albums before this came very, very close to being in my top 10 for their respective years, but this is the first time Bad Religion shows up, and there was no way I could deny the power of this album. And I guarantee it won't be the last time you hear from Bad Religion in this ongoing list. Coming in at number 4, making their first appearance on this list, but not their last, is Corrosion of Conformity with Deliverance. And this is the album where Pepper Keenan joined the band and everything kind of changed. Arguably for the better, for some people it's for the worst. It depends on how you look at it. Mainly because early COC is really that hardcore punk. Of course, they made their 1991 album Blind, which is an entity in and of itself. But this is the follow-up to that, and this is where I feel like they really made their stride and continued it on until a breakup. And then, of course, they were able to change, and then a little bit get back together before everything, sadly, fell apart again. But the band is still going thankfully. But yes, combining southern metal, combining alternative metal, combining hard rock, a little bit of that stoner influence, which I usually don't like to use as a descriptor because that basically just means Black Sabbath to me, and I hear so much more than Black Sabbath in Corrosion of Conformity. Deliverance may be considered their best album. To a lot of people it is. To a lot of people it might be Wise Blood. To me, it's a different album that will show up later. But Deliverance is a fantastic album from start to finish. It's just hard rocking enough, it's just heavy enough. It's just the right blend of everything to make you feel alright. And if you need an album like this, I highly recommend putting on Deliverance. It is fantastic from start to finish. I can't say that enough. Coming in at number 3 is one of my favorite bands of all time, with Dogman. Yes, I feel like they potentially made their heaviest album here. Ogre Tones, which, maybe you'll see show up on this list later, has the argument for also being their heaviest album. But Dogman was potentially their biggest, most mainstream album, and it helped them in so many different ways. From them being able to get on the Woodstock 94, being able to open for so many great bands because of all these things. But it'll always break my heart that the band never got the recognition that they deserve. Between Ty, Jerry, and Doug, you have 3 of the most talented musicians of all time. And they make the music that they want to make. Whether it gets heavy, whether it gets filled with a lot of great classic rock, whether it gets a little more alternative, progressive, there's so many different things you could say about King's X. And Dogman really is a great example of all of that. Dogman is one of the heaviest riffs that they've ever written. Cigarettes is one of my favorite ballads of all time. Lost in Germany is such a great mainstream sounding song. There's so many great things about this album. While it did get them the most recognition that they ever got in the mainstream eyes, I will always wish that they had more. I'm saying this to you as well. Check this album out, and just check out King's X in general. Whether you like hard rock, whether you like heavy metal, whether you like progressive, whether you like classic rock, even if you like the 60s, there's something for everything that you love in King's X. Coming in at number 2 is, of course, Dream Theater with Awake. And the biggest reason why this album is on here is take everything that you love about Images and Words and make it heavier. For some people, this is the better album. I would still say that Images and Words is my favorite of the two, and of course, check out my backwards marathon on Dream Theater to see all of what I think in the retrospective of Dream Theater. But for this particular album, it has really gone underrated over the years. There's still an appreciation for it, and at one time it was the heaviest Dream Theater album ever made. That is until Train of Thought, and then potentially another album. We'll see if we talk about that one or not. The riffs got heavier, the songs started getting a little bit shorter, but a little bit grander at the same time as well. They were able to expand upon their sound a little bit more because of the success of Images and Words. I mean, when you can have a song like Space Divest, you can have a song like Lie, you can have a song like Scarred, you can have a song like 6 O'Clock. There's so much to love about this album if you are a progressive metal fan. And if you are a progressive metal fan, I think this is absolutely recommended and almost forced listening. I think you should at least spin this album once to see if there is something redeeming about this album. And even if you hate James LaBrie's vocal ability, you might be a little bit swayed because of this album, because I think it's some of James's finest vocal work ever. And of course, that's why it's number 2 here for the top 10 albums of 1994. But what does that mean? What came in at number 1? Well, it just so happens to be Edge of Sanity with Purgatory Afterglow. This is the finest of pure melodic death metal and progressive death metal, arguably the first progressive death metal album. It really is one of my favorite albums of all time. I was about to say it's my favorite Edge of Sanity album, but it's not, and that's another one I'm going to be doing a backwards marathon on as well, I can guarantee you that. But if you're looking for like pure progressive death metal, it was the most refined before it got expanded upon with Purgatory Afterglow. And just the right amounts of melodic death metal thrown in as well. I feel like it's the perfect culmination of those two genres built in together. And yes, there is so many great death metal elements to this album as well too, but this is the first album where Dan Swano and company finally spread their wings and really shown off the capability of Edge of Sanity. And all you have to do is just check out what might be the biggest Edge of Sanity song, Black Tears. There's no screaming, It sounds death metal, it's proggy, it sounds melodic, and it is just the perfect song blending these genres. And of course, you have other great songs like the opening song with Twilight. I mean, there's so many great songs that I don't want to give everything away. But if you want to know where I personally feel progressive death metal started, I know some people would like to say that is My Arms, Your Hearse. You need to go back a few years. You need to go back to 1994 and check out where it really began with Edge of Sanity's Purgatory Afterglow. And there you go, folks, my top 10 albums of 1994. Whether you like what you heard, whether you're making a new discovery, whether you think I'm completely wrong, or if you want to give me crap for my own personal opinion, leave your comments down below and tell me what are your top 10 favorite albums of 1994. And until my next top 10 list, review, interview, or any other kind of video that I make here on the Heavy Debriefings YouTube channel, this is Josh Ronquist saying, see ya.